Joining us is a sister from another mister. I absolutely love how she moves. She's a fellow Taurian. She's a journalist. She's a professor. She's back in the New York City area. Let me welcome to the show many, many times over, Rula Jebreal. Hello
My
there.
darling sister, so good to be with you. So good to see you.
So tell me what's been going on. We have not caught up. What's been happening in your world besides the world literally being on fire? What has been happening with you? You were teaching in Florida?
I was teaching at the University of Miami. We were teaching and we graduated our amazing students online. 20% of our students are from multiple backgrounds. Our diversity are the first in their families ever to go to school, to college. And one of them texted me this morning. And I remember when Donald Trump was elected, she came to my office and she was in tears saying, what will happen? She was an undocumented immigrant and she was concerned, scared that she will be deported. And she said, this is the only home I ever known. Today, she texted me and she said, America is upholding its promise to us dreamers. And it made me tear up. So this morning, I woke up with great news. And it's, DACA stands, basically DACA stands.
We talked about that earlier, Sina and I, and John Roberts broke ranks, which means that there's hope in America that people will not just fall in line around injustice, that there might be a soul in some of these folk who are making these decisions.
Well, John Roberts have to decide what his legacy will be to back this racist, xenophobic, pro-genocidal president, or to stand up for law and order, for legality, morality, and democracy, ultimately.
Mm. When we've had you on before, we've talked a lot about what was happening in Israel with Palestinians, and I feel like we can walk and chew gum. We can talk about George Floyd, of course, and what's happening in this country, and Rayshard Brooks. But tell me what's happening back in your homeland, and what should we be paying attention to?
I think we need to pay attention to the fact that President Trump has created an alliance of dictators, murderers, thugs, of authoritarian regimes who wants to basically export Donald Trump model where black people live under the knee, oppressed, segregated, out of sight, and their voice unheard. That's why every time any of our colleagues, the black journalists, open her mouth, he goes like, shh. He wants to silence us. So he's empowering these dictators. And we can see with John Bolton's book that our worst fear has proven right. Even though John Bolton is the last coward to talk about it, and he's joining the fight just to profit from it. But what you see around the world, when Donald Trump went to China and he met Xi Jinping, the president, and he told him, yes, build concentration camps. And he's basically telling the prime minister of Israel, do whatever you want, annex the land, even though the land doesn't belong to you. But then we saw when he visited India, the prime minister, Narendra Modi, in that period of time, there were pogroms in the streets against people like you and me, Karen. This is the fact that he's waging a war on American citizens here at home, and also emboldening and empowering these murderous thugs so they can wage wars on our brothers, sisters, whether in India and Palestine, in China and elsewhere. This is a global battle. Exactly like racism is a global phenomena, our battle for freedom and equality and to breathe and for social justice is gone global. What you feel today, what George Floyd family felt, is what Palestinians have been feeling for decades. And we've been financing that oppressive system overseas. And now the war is coming back home to America. And we're seeing people who are supposed to protect and serve the Constitution actually gas protesters and shoot them in daylight, simply to uphold the white supremacist agenda and model that Donald Trump wants to enact in America.
Hi, Rula. I'm Sina and co-host on Thursdays here. And I just wanted to kind of ask, I'm an Iranian American, so we kind of look at politics in the Middle East every single day of our lives since we were children, right? And I guess the thing that I try to keep going back to is when was there a good example, either from the West, of a good policy initiative that we can maybe bring back and reignite? Not just for, I won't talk about Iran. We're talking about Palestine now, of course. So, like, what would work best that has worked in the past, or maybe a seed of something that's worked in the past that we could then apply to today and maybe the future?
Look, first of all, don't back murderous dictators. Don't support them when they butcher and dismember journalists in embassies simply because your own daughter had used, was engaged in a scandal where she used private emails. So to distract from your daughter's scandal, you have to pivot and basically tell this murderous dictator, go ahead, butcher that guy. It's fine with us. We will defend you and protect you because guess what? It's oil and it's good for Donald Trump's reputation. But above all, don't back the Chinese regime when they're building concentration camps. This is the lowest bar. We're asking you as the leader of the free world, quote unquote, to basically stand up for our own values, for what you profess to be the law of the land, what you profess to hold dear to your heart and soul, what was in the American Constitution. Do we believe still that all men were created equal or not? If you really believe in that promise of the American Constitution, then push that Constitution to the rest of the world and stand by it. Don't put your mouth where you put your money. Don't sell weapons to the Saudi regime who's butchering people in Yemen, or to the Israelis who are enacting apartheid, and come back home and talk to me about freedom, because you don't give two damns about freedom then.
866-801-8255. Rula, you were raised in Palestine. Your dad was an imam from Nigeria.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about, and you've talked on the show before about your sister, and I think you still have family there. And, I've been reading, and I think it's important that we make the connections because, in the past, I think it was easy for many Americans, even in America as it relates to black people, to live in a country and not see what was happening. It was easy because it didn't impact them. It didn't uproot their lives. It didn't disturb their lives. So, yeah, there could be a string of kids murdered or black men murdered or black women murdered at the hands of police or a George Zimmerman type. But it doesn't really impact my life, so that's their problem. Until maybe L.A. gets lit on fire after Rodney King, the verdict came back, or until Ferguson gets lit on fire. Now we're looking at these savages burn down their own neighborhoods, and we have opinions about that because we care about property. But these things that you just mentioned are happening all over the globe. And so when we see signs in England, protests in France, protests in Switzerland, protests in Germany, around George Floyd, Africa. George Floyd is his name is a symbol for all this oppression. Brazil. How do you see this, and how do you see it playing out?
This is a reaction to the authoritarian, xenophobic regime that that's been somehow that since Donald Trump was elected, there is this white supremacist movement that was galvanized. Those are the people who marched in Charleston, killed Heather Heyer, that marched saying Jews will not replace us, blood and soil. Then they start attacking people around America, going to churches, going to basically to every minority group and killing them. But racism, you mentioned before, is a global phenomenon. You go to France and you have our skin tone and you're treated differently. You go to Italy. I mean, I am an Italian citizen as well. And this year was the first year, last year for the Grammys, an Italian kid, his name is Muhammad. He has my skin tone. He won the Grammys. Oh, my God. All hell broke loose. The far right went crazy, said, oh, well, he doesn't represent Italy. He's not white enough. One of their leaders went to the streets. He's the governor of this region that we hear about, Lombardy, Milan, that is hit hard by COVID-19. He said, we need to protect the white race. That's what he said. In his election campaign, he said, my mandate is to protect the white race. Guess what? He couldn't protect his people against virus. which is the COVID-19, 30,000 people died. But for him, the real fight was the white race. So I was the only and still only Italian journalist that has this dark skin tone. A year after this kid won the Grammys, they asked me to host a show. Again, all hell broke loose. That was in January. They waged a campaign of attack and racist comments and misogynist and all kind of attacks simply because I didn't have the right skin tone to be deemed Italian enough. I hosted the show. That was January. I came back, and I remember thinking and telling all my European friends, look, racism is not an American phenomena only. It's not only connected to slavery, but it's connected to a deeper issue of how we look at our skin tone, as how we divided races in multiple, not one race. And you're deemed accepted or not based on the pigment in your own skin. A lot of European friends did not believe it, did not hear it, until George Floyd told them, I cannot breathe. He called upon his dead mom. And while he's calling upon his dead mom, he called upon their conscience to stand up for what's right in this era and to call out what's wrong. And for the first time, you could see Europeans looking at their own demons straight in the face, exactly like that cop looked at the camera directly, and he didn't care. They thought they should care, and that's why we see them in the streets. They are protecting and defending their own democracy, which is a multiracial democracy. Europeans know very well, 75 years ago, they had Nazism and fascism. Millions of their citizens, 20 million citizens died because of the idea of the superior race. And in the name of superior inferior race, there's destruction, and there is a genocide, there is a Holocaust. Millions of people were separated, segregated, and obliterated because of that. They should be ashamed that today in France, Marine Le Pen has 40% popularity. Salvini and the far right is at 38%. That's the same ideology that wants to come back. They failed on everything. They failed in tackling inequality. They failed in tackling this pandemic. So they're trying to divide people to tell them, well, the only thing that is left is nationalism, which means racism and misogyny and genocide ultimately.
Are you hopeful that this is that we talk about it? Is it a moment or is it a movement? Are you hopeful that folks confronting really their mortality, because what we are seeing is a dying breed. As I look at young folk, not seen as age, he calls himself a millennial, but the Gen X's and Z's, no, you're not. Those kids, as we see them, they're not cut from the same cloth. They don't seem to be wired the same way as their parents and grandparents. And I feel like when we look at the streets, who's out there? Those skateboarders, those white kids from the suburbs, and of course, black folk and others. It feels like there's something more permanent. Do you see that, Rula Jebreal?
I honestly, Karen, in my lifetime, I'm 7 now, just turned 47. So
we got the same birthday, except I'm older. Yeah.
Yes, and my daughter is 23. In my lifetime, I've seen apartheid disappear in South Africa. I've seen African-American man elected in this country, the country that basically embraced and created slavery. When they brought those
they perfected it. Let's say America perfected slavery. It didn't create it. It perfected it for white supremacy.
So basically they brought slaves here and they created for the American experiment, basically. They didn't only import it, they created laws and systems to protect it, enable it, to grow it, to expand it even. So in my lifetime, I've seen Nelson Mandela. I've seen President Obama. I've seen people die for social justice and for equality. And I've seen the pushback and the backlash against the backlash against the backlash. But power never concede anything without demand. Never did and never will. So we need to keep pushing. Because the moment we don't go out and vote and we don't exercise our unalienable rights, then the pushback will come back. And those people never die. White supremacists never died in this country. It hibernated. It went down, but then it came back even more vicious than it used to be before. They found an avatar, a vessel called Donald Trump, and they jumped at it. And we know that in Europe they have so many allies. People like Salvini in Italy, people like Marine Le Pen, people like Viktor Orban, people like Putin and Xi Jinping and Modi. So we have these evil forces around the world. What we do about it, it can be overwhelming and tiring, but we need to create a bigger coalition for humanity, a bigger coalition for all of us, because if one of us is not free, none of us is free.
Come
and
on.
if we cannot think that a Yemeni girl that is being butchered, her life worth less than Ivanka Trump. That's the system that is being created right now, where you have, America's ruling family pretending as if this country, this system, the only lives that matter are white people or even rich people. That's the only thing they care about. Everybody else can go down the drain. And if you have to basically call upon dictators to help you win the election, and in this case, you're called traitor, for them, it doesn't matter, because if the traitor is white, it's fine with them. And this is the system we need to dismantle.
Rula, speaking of the economics of this, from a foreign policy perspective, do you think, the rise of Salvini in Italy and some of the kind of nationalism that's taken over Europe and other parts of the world, how much of it is based in race and racism, and how much of it is a product of shifts in the economic winds globally, where labor moves around the world, and then you have the people in some of these countries having to not be able to do the same job as they did. They have to move into, say, maybe some other field, and they're not working right now.
So there's 3-4 things. One, the war on terror that was basically launched by the right, George W. Bush and the Republicans, his friends, where you spend trillions of dollars worldwide, destroyed countries, economies, but then they never really owned the responsibility for that. So you have that, the first failure. The second was the economic crash in 2008. That was where a lot of millions of people lost their homes, their jobs, everything. Again, it's a byproduct of policies that came out of the far right or the right or the alt-right, whatever they want to call themselves. Third, globalization, the savage globalization that punished middle and lower classes. Fourth, and let's be clear about fourth, the rise of social media and a campaign of misinformation. The biggest threat to democracy today is that kind of propaganda and misinformation, where people think that people like me and Karen are the enemy, and we're fighting over a piece of bread that is that big, while corporations are stealing billions of dollars. So the right-wing media and right-wing politicians, to distract the public opinion from the fact that Amazon is amassing billions of dollars, that Facebook is selling for billions of dollars propaganda and lies and death and hate, what they do, they put me against you and you against me. That's their strategy, and they're winning in this strategy, because so far, our intellectual argument was only about racism. Actually, we need to go after these corporations because it's part of the dialogue and the conversation.
From a journalism standpoint, because I met you as a journalist, and you and as I look at like media's fault here, because I think they have spent the last 20 years chasing the story and not going out and actually giving us what was happening, but just trying to be first to the market with whatever headline was out there. What do you think the role of media is going to be during this new phase that we're in, during this maybe healing phase, or where are we?
I mean, I'm really concerned, to be honest. For example, I was mentioning Italy. So there's this big car company that bought every major network and every major publication and newspapers. So they have 2 major newspapers and 1 news magazine. And that's used to be the progressive newspaper in Italy called Repubblica. Last week, their coverage was Trump is not to blame for George Floyd or the riots or anything. President Obama is to blame. There's not
That's
only
in Italy. That's in Italy.
Italy, historically most progressive newspaper. Okay, that Trump is basically the policy of reforming the police here is Obama's fault. That is their main argument.
Wow.
And guess what? It's written by a journalist who happened to live in New York City. Their correspondent in New York City, Federico Rampini, his name, that's his main argument. So what he's doing, he's understanding what the owners want. What the owners want is to pander to financiers in America, to basically the big corporation in America. And they think the establishment wants that line, so they're pushing that propagandistic line. They have another newspaper, which is La Stampa, a little bit more progressive. And they had people like me writing sometimes for that to show that they have some black people there. We know that in America now, after we discovered that Donald Trump basically green light concentration camps for Xi Jinping, the Chinese tyrant, there's not one Muslim name or Muslim voice in any of the networks. None. CNN actually, I think, let go of their last Muslim voice there. I'm not saying you need to have representation, but diversity matter. Because if you want to tell the story of communities, of plight of refugees, women, immigrants, Latinos, Muslims, Black, or even what foreign policy is about, and the scandal of Donald Trump are all in foreign policy, Ukraine, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, you name it, and you don't have one person that can tell you the story, then you're failing spectacularly. And you're actually betraying the trust of the public opinion.
I want to talk with you off mic about what we can do about it, because I have some thoughts, and I think you have some means to make things happen. And you're going to be around for a while. You're going to stick around in New York for a while, or are you going to?
I'm here. Obviously, I mean, I'm not moving anymore. This is home. Like DACA dreamers, I feel home. This is my country. I'll fight for it, for our ideals. And I think what you're doing is so important. And I cannot thank you guys enough for that, because information is power, and it's empowering, and propaganda is control. They want to control the public opinion and brainwash people, whitewash their crimes and brainwash people. What you're doing is the real resistance. Steve Bannon was right when he said the real opposition is the media. We are the opposition, and we will own what we're doing and reshape this society.
Rula Jebreal, you can follow her at Rula, R-U-L-A, Jebreal, Jebreal on the Twitters, and go to rulajebreal.com to see all of the wonderful things she's doing. She'll be back. We're going to keep talking. We're going to talk off mic. Thank you for being here, my sister. I appreciate you.
Thank you. And Black Lives Matter.